The clinic's front lights were already dimming to that tired, end-of-shift amber, when the first shout cracked the quiet like a dropped tray in a church. Outside, winter air pressed against the glass doors, fogging them in soft blooms every time someone rushed past. Inside, the hallway smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, the kind that had been warming too long, and the building itself seemed to exhale. Phones finally silent, chairs pushed in, cabinets clicked shut one by one. A nurse in pale blue scrubs was halfway through turning the open sign to closed when a deep, vibrating sound rolled out from the corridor. Not a bark, not a snarl meant for show. A low growl that sat in the chest like thunder you could feel before you heard. Heads turned, feet stopped, and in the narrow stretch of hallway outside exam room 3, a police dog, broad-shouldered, black and tan, vest still on, leash slack, had planted itself like a barricade. The dog's paws were squared, claw lightly tapping the linoleum as it adjusted its stance, body angled just so. Not wild, not frantic, but deliberate, rehearsed, professional. The handler, a tall man with tired eyes and a posture that suggested he'd learned long ago to stay calm when everyone else couldn't, lifted a hand in a subtle signal. The dog didn't look back. It didn't need to. Its gaze was locked on the door, on the thin strip of light under it, on the space where danger sometimes tried to slip in unnoticed. The hallway was a freeze frame. Patients' families clutching coats, a receptionist frozen mid-step, a janitor holding a mop like it could help. Then a man in a dark jacket, one of the late arrivals, face half shadowed by the harsh fluorescent, moved forward as if he belonged there. "Excuse me," he said. Too smooth, too impatient, reaching for the handle with a confidence that didn't match the hour. The dog's growl deepened, almost inaudible now, more vibration than sound. The man tried to sidestep, to angle his body around the animal like it was furniture. That was the mistake. In one crisp motion, the dog snapped the air inches from the man's wrist. No contact, no bite, just a warning so precise it felt like a line drawn in steel. The man recoiled, eyes flaring with surprise and anger, and for a heartbeat the mask slipped. Not concern, not confusion. Calculation. "Control your dog," he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear, as if volume could become authority. The handler stepped forward, voice low and even, the kind of calm that made chaos feel embarrassed. "Back up," he said. 2 words, no heat, no threat. Yet the air shifted, as if the building itself obeyed. The man raised his hands in a showy gesture of innocence, but he didn't retreat far. He hovered, watching, waiting, like someone who believed doors always opened for him. Behind the barrier of fur and muscle, behind that locked room, a small sound drifted out. Soft, childlike, a tiny cough that tugged the heart. The nurse nearest the scene swallowed hard, eyes darting between the dog and the door. Her voice came out in a whisper that wasn't meant to carry, but in the clinic's sudden silence, it did. "Why is he guarding that room?" No one answered. The handler didn't move his eyes from the man in the dark jacket. The dog didn't move its paws from the floor. And somewhere inside exam room 3, a little girl sat with her knees pulled tight, while her parents stood close enough to shield her with their own bodies, not yet understanding that the safest thing in the building at that moment was the living wall in the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed. A clock ticked too loudly. The dog's breath came steady, controlled, as if it had all the time in the world to hold the line. And that's when the thought hit everyone watching, cold and sharp. like stepping into ice water. A police dog doesn't block a door like that for nothing. The nurse's whisper turned into something heavier in the minds around her. A sentence that felt like a warning and a promise all at once. Police dog blocks the door to protect little girl, and the reason will make her parents cry. That morning had started the way small towns like to pretend they always did. Soft sunlight spilling over the roofs like warm milk. The kind that made frost on the grass sparkle and made even worn-out sidewalks look clean for a few hours. Main Street woke up slowly, with the low rumble of delivery trucks and the gentle clink of a flagpole rope against metal. And by 8 o'clock, the diner on the corner was already alive with the steady music of plates and voices. Inside, coffee steamed in thick mugs, bacon sizzled behind the counter, and the same 3 older men argued over the same 3 subjects: weather, football, and whether the town council ever fixed anything right the first time. Outside, school pickup traffic was already forming its familiar knots. Parents leaning out windows to wave at teachers. Kids hopping over slushy curbs, backpacks bouncing. The air full of those bright, careless sounds children make when they still believe the world is safe by default. And in the middle of all that normal, there was a little girl named Lily, sitting in the back seat of a dusty sedan with her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she'd practiced being calm. She was small for her age, hair pulled into a tidy ponytail, cheeks pink from the cold. And when she smiled, it was brave. Sweet, polite, determined. But it didn't quite reach her eyes. Those eyes stayed a fraction too alert, watching reflections in the window, watching people pass, as if she'd learned that danger sometimes looked ordinary until it wasn't. Her mom, Rachel, reached back from the passenger seat to squeeze Lily's knee with the gentlest pressure, a silent check-in that said, "I'm here, I've got you," even when she wasn't sure she did. Rachel's face carried the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Dark shadows, a tightness around her mouth like she was holding back 100 thoughts at once. And her husband, Mark, drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw set, eyes flicking too often to the rearview mirror. They were loving in a way that showed through small habits. Rachel tucking Lily's scarf closer without being asked. Mark slowing at every intersection like he was afraid of rushing time. But underneath that love was a worry they couldn't name out loud. A worry that had been living in their home like an unwelcome guest. Quiet, stubborn, always in the corner of the room. Mark had told himself it was just stress. Bills, work, the ordinary grind. Rachel told herself Lily was simply shy. Yet every time Lily fell silent at the wrong sound, every time Mark felt the urge to check behind them for no reason, the truth pressed closer, like a storm building beyond the horizon. Across town, parked outside the station with its faded brick and American flag snapping in the morning breeze, Officer Daniel Hale was finishing his first patrol coffee and scanning the day's briefing with the same measured calm he'd carried for years. Daniel wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He moved like a man who'd been tested and learned to waste nothing. No motion, no words, no emotions in public. People called him veteran, not because of the gray at his temples, but because of the quiet authority that seemed to sit on his shoulders like a uniform beneath the uniform. Beside him, his canine partner, Rex, waited with the patient stillness of an animal that understood duty as more than training. Rex lay on the pavement like a statue, ears twitching at distant sounds, nose working the air in slow, deliberate pulls. He wasn't the kind of dog that barked to announce himself. He watched, he listened. He read the world the way Daniel read faces. Around them, kids occasionally pointed from passing cars. "Look, a police dog," and Daniel would offer a small nod, while Rex remained calm, gaze steady, as if weighing each person's intent. That was Rex's gift. In a town where people smiled even when they were lying, Rex didn't care about smiles. He cared about scent, heartbeat, hesitation, the micro stutters of guilt and fear. Daniel had learned to trust that gift the hard way. If Rex's body went still, if his stare tightened, if his breathing changed, it meant the air itself had shifted. Something hidden, something wrong. And on that bright, ordinary morning, as Daniel clipped Rex's leash and stepped into the sunlit street, the town looked peaceful enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. But Rex's nose lifted once, just for a second, and Daniel's eyes narrowed as he followed the invisible thread his partner had caught. Somewhere ahead, behind the diner chatter and the school traffic, a story was already moving toward them. Quiet at first, like footsteps on snow, waiting for the moment it could no longer stay buried. By late afternoon, the community center looked exactly like the kind of place people trusted without thinking. Brick walls painted a friendly cream, paper snowflakes taped in the windows, a hand-lettered sign near the entrance promising after-school tutoring and hot cocoa in the lobby. Inside, the air carried the mingled smells of crayons, floor wax, and the faint sweetness of powdered drink mix. And the lobby buzzed with that end-of-day shuffle. Parents signing clipboards, kids tugging sleeves, volunteers stacking chairs, while someone's phone played tinny music in a back room. Rachel held Lily's hand as they approached the front desk, offering small smiles that felt practiced. Mark stood close behind them, shoulders slightly hunched as if he could make his family smaller just by leaning in. They were there for something simple. An updated enrollment form, a meeting about Lily's reading program. A normal step in a normal life. Lily's brave smile returned when the receptionist waved at her, and for a moment, it almost worked. Then the front doors swung open hard enough to rattle the glass, and the sound cut clean through the lobby like a blade. A man strode in wearing a heavy jacket despite the warm heaters, boots scuffing the tile with exaggerated confidence, his presence filling the room the way a bad smell does. Sudden, unavoidable, sour. He wasn't big in a bodybuilding way, but he carried himself like someone who'd never been told no and didn't plan to start now. His voice rose before anyone had a chance to greet him. "You people gonna keep hiding back there?" he called, loud enough that every child looked up. A volunteer near the bulletin board stiffened. A tutor's smile faltered. The receptionist, young, polite, exhausted, straightened in her chair and tried for professionalism. "Sir, can I help you?" The man ignored her and slapped his palm against the counter in a sharp, theatrical smack, like a gavel. "You can start by doing your job," he said, dragging the words out as if he wanted an audience to savor them. He leaned over the counter, eyes scanning name tags, and then landed on a middle-aged volunteer with reading glasses and a cardigan who had been sorting papers. "You," he snapped, pointing. "Still telling folks you don't have the file? Don't play dumb." The volunteer blinked, confused and startled. I don't know what file you mean," she stammered, glancing helplessly at the receptionist. The man laughed, a short, ugly sound that made the kids in the lobby quiet down. "Oh, you don't know," he repeated, mocking, and then raised his voice even higher, turning humiliation into a performance. "Funny how you don't know when it's my request, but you know plenty when it's time to beg the town for donations." A few parents shifted uncomfortably. Nobody moved to intervene. That was the rule in places like this. Keep your head down. Don't make it worse. Let the loud person burn out. Lily's fingers tightened around her mother's hand until her knuckles went pale. Her brave smile disappeared as if someone had turned off a light, and her whole body went still. too still, the way prey goes still when it spots a shadow. Rachel felt it instantly and reacted on instinct, stepping half a stride forward so her body blocked Lily from view, one protective shoulder angled like a shield. "Mark," she whispered without looking back, and Mark's jaw tightened as he followed her gaze to the man at the counter. He'd never seen him before, at least not up close, but something about him struck a familiar nerve. That same pressure Mark sometimes felt in the rearview mirror. The man's eyes swept the room and snagged on Rachel's movement, and for a heartbeat his expression flickered with recognition, quick, sharp, satisfied, before he turned it into a smirk. "Well, well," he said, voice dropping just enough to feel personal while still letting everyone hear. "Look what we've got here." Across the lobby, Officer Daniel Hale had stepped in to drop off paperwork for the youth program, Rex at his side on a loose leash, calm as ever. Daniel's eyes had already started to read the scene, the stiff shoulders, the silence, the way adults avoided eye contact. But Rex noticed something first. The dog's head lifted, ears snapping forward like antennas catching a signal, body locking into a stillness so complete it looked like a statue had replaced him. His gaze fixed on the man at the counter, not with barking aggression, not with frantic fear, but with that unmistakable focus of recognition, as if the scent in the air matched a memory Rex didn't like. Daniel felt the subtle change travel down the leash and stopped moving, his posture settling into quiet readiness. Rex didn't growl, he didn't lunge, he simply watched, unblinking, and in the sudden tension of the lobby, that watchfulness felt louder than shouting, because animals didn't perform for attention. They reacted to truth. Daniel didn't announce himself with a raised voice or a hand on his belt, the way some officers did when they wanted a room to know who held power. He simply moved, and the movement alone changed the temperature. One step, then another, measured, quiet, inevitable, until he stood within easy speaking distance of the counter, angled so he could see the man's hands and the exits in the same glance. His face remained neutral, but the softness that had been there when he'd nodded to a child a minute ago vanished, replaced by something tighter and older. The look of a man who'd learned the cost of waiting too long. "Afternoon," Daniel said, voice low enough that the words didn't compete with the man's volume. The bully enforcer turned as if irritated that the audience had found a new focal point. His eyes flicked over Daniel's uniform, lingered on the K9 vest, and the smirk that formed was the kind that tried to turn caution into a joke. "We got dogs doing paperwork now?" he asked loudly, fishing for laughs that didn't come. Daniel didn't bite. "You're disturbing minors," he said, not accusing, not pleading, stating a fact like a weather report. "Lower your voice." For a second the lobby held its breath. The man's expression hardened, then smoothed again into performative charm. "I'm just trying to get help," he said, spreading his hands as if he'd been wronged. "But folks around here love to pretend they don't hear me." Daniel's gaze shifted past him to the volunteer with shaking hands, to the receptionist swallowing her fear, to the children clustered like birds sensing a hawk. "Step back from the counter," Daniel said. Again, minimal words. No escalation, no drama, just a line. Rex, still and silent, took 2 precise steps forward at Daniel's side, not pulling, not dragging the leash, but positioning himself with uncanny intention. The dog angled his body so that his broad chest faced the man, while his hindquarters subtly shielded the space behind him. Where Rachel stood, Lily tucked tight against her mother's hip. It happened in seconds. So smooth most people didn't even realize they were watching a protective maneuver. Rex's tail stayed low and steady, ears forward, eyes locked. He wasn't barking for attention. He was marking a boundary. Rachel felt it like a blanket being placed around her child. Warm, heavy, safe. Lily's breath hitched, and for the first time since the doors had slammed open, her shoulders loosened a fraction. Mark, behind them, stared at the dog as if he couldn't decide whether to be amazed or grateful or both. The enforcer noticed, too. His eyes narrowed at Rex's stance, and his smile sharpened into something mean. He took a small step sideways, as if testing whether he could get an angle past the dog's line. But Rex mirrored him instantly, tight and controlled, never closing distance, never inviting a fight, simply refusing to give him a clean path to the family. Daniel didn't raise a hand, didn't shout, didn't posture. He let the dog's calm competence speak, and then he spoke again, quieter. "You can talk to the receptionist like everyone else," Daniel said. "Or you can leave." The man laughed once, short and brittle, and leaned back as if he'd decided this was boring. "Fine," he said, lifting his chin. "I'll leave." He backed away from the counter with exaggerated patience, like he was doing everyone a favor. And for a moment the room exhaled. Chairs creaked, a child whispered, someone's phone buzzed. But as he reached the doorway, he stopped and turned his head just enough to catch Rachel's profile behind Rex's shoulder. The smirk returned, slower this time, like a blade sliding from a sheath. His eyes flicked to Mark, then back to Rachel, and his voice dropped into a range meant to slip under the skin. "Tell your husband," he said softly, the words carried on the hum of fluorescent lights, "to stop asking questions." The sentence landed like a stone in a still pond. Mark's face drained of color, as if the man had spoken a name he shouldn't know. And Rachel's grip on Lily tightened until Lily winced. Rex's body went even more rigid, a silent warning vibrating through his frame, and Daniel's eyes narrowed, not in surprise, but in recognition of something far more serious than a lobby tantrum. The enforcer held the smirk for one more beat, enjoying the fear he'd planted, then pushed the door open and disappeared into the bright, ordinary afternoon, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly understood that whatever this was, it wasn't random. By the time Rachel and Mark gathered themselves enough to make the walk from the community center to the police station, the sun had shifted into that late-day slant that turned everything golden and deceptive, as if the world were trying to paint over what had just happened. Lily sat in the back seat again, quieter than before, eyes fixed on nothing, the kind of stillness that made a parent's stomach twist. Daniel followed in his cruiser after finishing a brief statement with the receptionist, not because he was assigned to babysit frightened families, but because the dog at his side had not relaxed since the man in the doorway spoke that line, "Tell your husband to stop asking questions," as if it had been carved into the air. At the station, the lobby smelled like old paper and radiator heat, and the desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with a folksy smile and a coffee-stained mustache named Sergeant Pruitt, greeted them with the casual tone of someone who had decided the outcome before hearing the story. Now, Pruitt said, when Mark explained the intimidation, the implied threat. The way Lily froze like she recognized the man. "You're probably reading too much into it. This town's full of loudmouths." He was probably having a bad day. Rachel's voice shook despite her effort to keep it steady. "He knew us," she said. "He knew my husband. He said it like he'd been watching us." Pruitt chuckled softly, as if humor could shrink fear. "Misunderstanding," he repeated, tapping his pen against the desk. "And if we go filing reports every time someone runs their mouth, we'll drown in paperwork. Don't stir trouble over nothing." Daniel stood a few steps back, posture neutral, but his eyes had sharpened. He watched the way Pruitt didn't ask for the man's name, didn't ask for a description, didn't ask for a timeline, just offered a lid to put back on the pot before anyone noticed it boiling. "There were kids there," Mark insisted, anger bleeding through the shock now. "He cornered staff. He singled my family out." Pruitt leaned forward with the practiced sympathy of someone who had perfected dismissal. "Look," he said, lowering his voice like he was doing them a kindness. "We don't need a situation. You want my advice? Go home. Keep your head down. Let it blow over." Rachel's eyes widened at the phrase, "keep your head down," because she'd heard that kind of advice before. Never said loudly, always offered like a secret, always meaning the same thing. You're on your own. Daniel's jaw flexed once, barely visible, and he stepped in. "Sergeant," he said, calm, "I'd like to take the report." Pruitt's smile tightened at the corners. "Hail," he replied, still friendly, still easy, but now with an edge that suggested hierarchy. "No need. I'll handle it." Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded. But the nod wasn't submission. It was a marker, a mental note. When Pruitt finally scribbled a few lines on a form, it looked more like an obligation than an investigation. And when Mark asked about camera footage from the community center or traffic cams nearby, Pruitt waved a hand. "Cameras don't always catch things," he said. "And half those systems are outdated anyway." Daniel's gaze flicked to the hallway behind the desk where a monitor bank sat dark, and something in his expression went colder. The next day, when Daniel tried to follow up properly, the rot showed itself in small, ugly ways. The report form Pruitt had filed couldn't be found in the system. The receptionist's written statement was suddenly misplaced. The community center's lobby camera, which had worked fine for months, was now under maintenance. And when Daniel spoke to two parents who had been standing 10 feet away during the incident, their certainty had evaporated into nervous shrugs. "I mean, I didn't really see," one murmured, eyes darting toward the station windows. "He was loud, yeah, but maybe it wasn't that bad." It was the kind of collective amnesia that didn't happen by accident. Daniel felt it in his bones, the way a seasoned man feels a shift in wind before the storm hits. And Rex felt it in the air with every slow inhale. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the community center under the pretense of a routine check-in. Rex walking at his heel, leash loose, body relaxed until they reached the lobby threshold. Then Rex's head lifted, nostrils flaring, and his entire frame pulled into that focused stillness again. He tracked with his nose low, following an invisible line across the tile where boots had scuffed and tempers had flared, past the front desk, past the bulletin board, past the cocoa station, ignoring everything else like it was background noise. Daniel let him work, eyes scanning, and watched as Rex's trail led not toward the front doors where the man had left, but deeper, toward a staff-only corridor marked restricted, toward back offices where the public had no reason to go. Rex paused at a locked door, pressed his nose to the seam, and then looked up at Daniel with an intensity that felt like language. He came this way. Daniel's pulse slowed, not from calm but from control, because suddenly the scene in the lobby wasn't just intimidation. It was access. Whoever that man was, he didn't just want to scare people. He moved through places he shouldn't, and someone had made sure the official story stayed clean. Daniel rested his hand lightly on Rex's collar, feeling the dog's coiled readiness, and stared at the restricted sign as if it had just become a confession. The restricted corridor behind the community center felt different from the cheerful lobby, like stepping behind the painted backdrop of a play and finding raw wood and exposed nails. The lights were harsher here, the hum louder, the air colder, and the walls held scuff marks and old tape shadows where notices had been peeled away. Daniel kept his expression neutral as a staff member with a jangling keyring unlocked the door for him under the excuse of just making sure everything's secure, but his mind was already cataloging exits, cameras, and the small gaps where secrets like to hide. Rex moved first, nose low, tail steady, paws quiet against the industrial tile. He wasn't searching wildly. He was reading the floor like it was a page. Halfway down the hallway, near a bulletin board labeled "Staff Only" and a row of metal lockers, Rex slowed, then stopped so abruptly the leash went taut for a heartbeat. His ears snapped forward. His breathing changed, shorter, sharper, like a metronome clicking faster. Then he sat. Not the casual sit of a dog resting, but the trained, unmistakable alert that said, "Here." Daniel's stomach tightened. He crouched beside Rex, eyes sweeping the ground and the baseboards, looking for anything out of place in a corridor designed to look boring. At first he saw only dust bunnies and a fallen paperclip, the kind of junk no one bothered to pick up. Then Rex's nose dipped toward a gap between the bottom of a locker and the wall, and Daniel followed the line of sight. Tucked there, half hidden in shadow, was something small and dark. A rectangle no bigger than a thumb with a dull metal connector. An ordinary USB drive, the kind people lost all the time, except this one had a strip of red tape wrapped around it like a warning flag. Daniel didn't touch it right away. He scanned again, noting a security camera in the ceiling corner, angled toward the hallway, noting the blind spot created by an overhanging beam, noting that the USB sat precisely in that shadowed pocket where a drop would be easy and retrieval discreet. He pulled on thin gloves from his pocket with smooth, practiced motions. The procedural calm of a man who refused to let adrenaline make decisions for him. Rex stayed seated, eyes locked on the object as if it might move on its own. "Good," Daniel murmured. Not praise for obedience, but acknowledgement of partnership. He slid 2 fingers into the gap, careful not to smear what might be the only clean thread in a tangled mess, and lifted the drive free. It felt warm, as if it had been handled recently. Daniel's eyes flicked to the staff member, hovering a few steps back, pretending not to watch too closely. "You didn't see this," Daniel said evenly. The staffer blinked, swallowed, and gave a quick, nervous nod. The kind that wasn't agreement, but survival. Daniel slipped the USB into an evidence bag, sealed it, and tucked it into his inner jacket pocket like it was fragile glass. He didn't announce what he'd found. He didn't call it in over the radio. Not yet. He'd learned something in his years on the job. In a town where paperwork went missing and cameras stopped working, information itself was the most dangerous thing to carry openly. He walked Rex back through the lobby like nothing had happened, exchanging polite nods and small-town smiles, while his mind raced in tight, controlled lanes. Outside, the sun was dropping behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the parking lot, and the cold had sharpened into a biting edge. Daniel drove not to the station, but to a quieter place. A small municipal office annex with an old computer that wasn't tied to the station network and a door that locked from the inside. He waited until the building was empty, then set Rex down in a corner with water and a command to stay alert. The dog lay down, but his eyes never fully closed. Daniel plugged the USB into the machine and watched the screen flicker, his pulse steady despite the stakes. A folder appeared with no label, just a string of numbers. Inside were audio files, short clips with timestamps and scanned documents, forms, emails, permits. Each one a brick in a wall someone had tried to build around the truth. Daniel clicked the first audio file, and a muffled conversation filled the room. 2 men speaking in low voices, one of them unmistakably, the bully enforcer from the community. Center, the other older, smoother, the kind of voice that wore authority like cologne. "If Mark keeps pushing," the older voice said, "we make an example. Quiet. Clean." The enforcer laughed. "And the kid?" he asked, like he was talking about a loose dog, not a child. There was a pause, then the older voice again, colder now. "The kid is leverage, always has been." Daniel's jaw tightened so hard, it ached. He clicked another file. An email chain about a development project near the river, a landfill site, a zoning change pushed through with unusual speed. Mark's name appeared in a document header. Public records request, environmental report inquiry, a complaint filed about chemical runoff near the school's playground. Then a scanned note, handwritten, jagged with anger. "Stop asking questions." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the room suddenly too small, the air too thin. Lily wasn't just frightened because a loud man yelled in a lobby. She was frightened because someone had decided her family was a problem to be solved. And because Mark, by accident, by conscience, by trying to do the right thing, had stumbled into something powerful people wanted buried. Daniel stared at the files until the words blurred, then looked over at Rex, who lifted his head as if he felt the shift. "They're targeting a child," Daniel said softly, the sentence tasting like poison. Rex's ears pricked and his gaze sharpened, and in that moment Daniel understood with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to be handled with a casual report and a folksy shrug. This was a line, and someone had already crossed it. In a room that smelled like leather chairs and expensive cologne trying to mask cigarette smoke, the town's real decisions were being made far from the community center's cheerful paper snowflakes. The building wasn't flashy, an office suite tucked above a closed storefront on the quiet end of Main Street. But the kind of people who entered through its side stairwell didn't need neon signs. They needed privacy. A round table sat under a low lamp, light pooled like amber over folders, coffee cups, and a single tablet glowing with maps of the riverfront. The man everyone in town knew as Mr. Carraway leaned back in his chair as if he owned the air itself. Silver hair combed perfectly, suit pressed too sharply for a small place like this. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a donor, a sponsor, the guy who shook hands at ribbon cuttings and smiled for photos with checks the size of doors. Next to him sat Councilman Dyer, same friendly face that waved at parades, same warm laugh on local radio. Now quiet, eyes flicking to the door whenever it creaked, fingers tapping like a guilty metronome. And standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, watching the streetlights come on, was the enforcer from the community center, boots scuffed, jacket still on, chewing gum like it was a job. He was restless, impatient. But he didn't speak until Carraway did, because even Muscle knew who signed the checks. "You're telling me," Carraway said, calm as a banker reviewing numbers, "that a single family is becoming inconvenient." The word inconvenient landed with a softness that made it more chilling. The enforcer shrugged. "The husband's been sniffing around," he said. "Records requests, complaints. He asked the wrong questions in the wrong places." Dyer cleared his throat, forcing a smile that didn't belong in this room. "It's probably nothing," he offered weakly. "People get nervous, you know. They hear rumors about runoff," and Carraway raised one finger, not sharply, just enough. And Dyer went silent like a child. "Rumors become audits," Carraway said, still mild. "Audits become headlines. Headlines become federal eyes. And federal eyes," he added, leaning forward slightly, "are bad for business." He slid a folder across the table. fingertips immaculate. The front page held Mark's name, neatly typed, along with dates and copies of requests and notes. It looked like a file on a suspect, except Mark was a father who drove a dusty sedan and worried about his daughter's reading program. "This is our problem," Caraway said, as if reading from a quarterly report. "Not because he's important, because he's persistent." The enforcer grinned, a flash of teeth meant to reassure his boss that persistence was easy to break. "I gave him a message," he said, "at the center, in front of everybody. He heard it." Caraway's eyes didn't brighten with approval. They stayed flat, calculating. "Good," he said. "Fear is efficient. But it's not always permanent." He tapped the tablet, pulling up a map with highlighted parcels along the river. Land marked for development, future profit drawn in clean lines. "We do this clean," he continued. "No noise, no chaos. Just containment." Dyer swallowed. "Containment," he echoed, like he wanted the word to mean something harmless. Caraway nodded. "Step 1, he said, counting on his fingers like a teacher. "We discredit them. Make the husband look unstable, angry, obsessive. A troublemaker with a grudge." He glanced at Dyer. "Your office can help with that. A few concerns raised. A whisper to the right editor." Dyer forced another smile, sweat gathering at his hairline. "I can mention it," he said, voice thin. "Step 2, Caraway continued, turning to the enforcer. "You increase pressure. They feel watched. They feel cornered. They decide on their own that leaving town is the safest option." The enforcer nodded eagerly, like this was the part he understood best. Then Caraway paused, and the room's quiet deepened, the lamp's hum suddenly loud. "And step 3, he said softly, as if discussing a line item no one liked but had to address. "We remove their leverage." The enforcer's grin faded into curiosity. Dyer's tapping fingers stopped. Caraway didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The child," he said, eyes on the tablet, not on the men, like he didn't want to see their reactions. "She's the anchor. Parents will endure anything for themselves. They will not endure it for her." He looked up then, gaze steady, and his smile returned. Public-friendly, charitable, perfectly wrong. "So if they refuse to move," Caraway said, "we get the child out of the way." Dyer's face drained as if the blood had fled to hide. "You can't," he started, then stopped when Caraway's eyes shifted toward him like a blade turning. The enforcer's jaw worked, excitement and menace mixing behind his eyes. "How?" he asked. Caraway's voice stayed smooth. "Not dramatic," he said. "Not messy, just inevitable. An incident, a misunderstanding, a situation that convinces them they have no choice." Outside the window, the town glowed peaceful beneath winter stars. Inside, 3 men treated a family's life like a spreadsheet, and the first move had already been made. By the next evening, the town that had felt familiar for years began to feel like it was wearing a mask, smiling too hard, watching too long. And Rachel noticed it first, in the smallest, most ordinary places. At the grocery store, when a man she'd never seen before lingered at the end of an aisle with nothing in his basket, eyes flicking up every time Lily shifted beside her. At the gas station, when a dark sedan sat 2 pumps away, with its engine running, exhaust curling into the cold, the driver's face hidden behind the reflection of fluorescent lights. At home, when their porch light seemed dimmer than usual, as if even the bulbs were trying to keep secrets. Mark tried to rationalize it, tried to tell himself he was just keyed up after the community center incident. But he couldn't ignore the pattern of pressure building like snowpack before an avalanche. The first anonymous call came at 7:12 p.m., just as Rachel was stirring soup on the stove and Lily was coloring at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration the way she used to do before fear learned her habits. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and when Mark answered, there was only silence. Then a faint click, like someone smiling on the other end. The next call came an hour later from a blocked number, and this time a voice slipped through, distorted and low. You should have listened. Mark demanded to know who it was, but the line went dead. Rachel watched Lily's hand freeze mid-crayon, her shoulders tightening as if her body recognized danger before her mind could. Mark hung up and forced a steady tone, telling Lily it was a wrong number, but the lie didn't land. Lily's eyes stayed too wide, tracking the adults' faces like she was reading the truth they couldn't say. Daniel Hale drove by their house that night under the pretense of routine patrol, Rex in the passenger seat, and he didn't need a report to know something was wrong. The street was quiet, but not peacefully quiet. It was the kind of quiet that waited. Rex's head lifted the moment they turned onto the block, nose working, ears angling toward shadows between parked cars. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He stared at the dark sedan idling 2 houses down as if the vehicle itself had a heartbeat he could hear. Daniel didn't stop the cruiser. He rolled past slowly, committing the license plate to memory. And when the sedan's headlights blinked once, an almost imperceptible signal, Rex's body stiffened so hard Daniel felt it through the seat. The next morning brought the friendly warning, delivered in a tone that pretended to be helpful while sliding a blade under the ribs. Mark was locking up his work truck when a uniformed officer he vaguely recognized, someone from the station, someone who laughed at barbecues and waved at parades, approached with hands in his pockets and a smile too casual. "Hey," the officer said, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Heard you had a little situation at the community center." Mark's back tightened. "We tried to file a report," he replied carefully. The officer's smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Yeah," he said, voice dropping. "And I'm telling you, man to man, drop it. Folks get nervous when people start tossing around accusations. This town doesn't like drama." Mark's jaw clenched. "My daughter was there," he said. "That guy threatened us." The officer gave a small shrug that carried the weight of surrender. "Sometimes," he murmured, "it's smarter to let things go." Then, as if to soften the poison, he patted Mark's shoulder and walked away, leaving behind the clear message. The uniform could not be trusted. That afternoon, Rachel found a folded note tucked under their windshield wiper in the school parking lot. No name, no signature, just 3 words printed in block letters. "Leave it alone." Her hands shook as she crumpled it, and Lily watched from the back seat, quiet, absorbing the fear like it was weather. Daniel met them outside the school office on a coincidental pass-through, Rex walking at his side, and the dog's behavior told the story without a single question. Rex refused to relax, eyes tracking the edges of the lot, nostrils flaring at every gust of wind, pausing to stare at dark windows in parked cars as if he expected them to blink back. When a distant car door slammed across the street, Rex pivoted instantly, body between Lily and the sound. And Rachel felt tears prick her eyes at the sheer, wordless certainty of that protection. That night, Mark finally said what both of them had been circling like a dangerous truth. "We need to get her somewhere safe." Rachel nodded too fast, relief and terror tangled together. They packed a small bag for Lily, pajamas, her favorite stuffed rabbit, the books she liked to pretend she wasn't afraid to read aloud, and decided on the clinic across town, bright lights, people around, a place that felt harder to reach. Mark drove carefully, taking turns he didn't need, checking mirrors every few seconds. And at first the streets looked empty enough to convince him he was overreacting, until Rachel leaned forward, squinting at the rear view, and whispered, "Mark, that car." A dark sedan rolled through the intersection behind them, just far enough back to seem accidental, just steady enough to feel intentional. Mark turned left abruptly. The sedan turned left. Mark took a winding side street. The sedan followed. Lily's small voice floated from the back seat, thin and frightened. "Daddy, are we playing a game?" Mark swallowed hard, hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. "No, sweetheart," he said, forcing calm into it, voice like air into a sinking boat. "We're just taking a different way." Rachel's eyes locked on the sedan's headlights in the mirror as they grew a fraction closer, and in that moment the truth landed with the weight of a closing door. They weren't just scared. They were being hunted. The clinic's parking lot glowed under harsh sodium lights that made the winter night look bruised. And Mark coasted into a space near the entrance with his heart hammering so hard it felt like it might rattle the windshield. Behind them, the dark sedan rolled past the driveway at a careful speed, not stopping, not leaving either, just circling the block like a shark testing the shallows. Rachel unbuckled Lily with shaking hands, whispering soothing nonsense, as if words could sew up the fear. And Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit so tight its ears bent. Before Mark could decide whether to run inside or keep driving, Officer Daniel Hale's cruiser slid into the lot from the side street, tires crunching lightly on salt grit, and the sight of that familiar uniform hit Rachel like a lifeline. Daniel stepped out, face composed but eyes sharp. Rex at his heel wearing his K9 vest as if it were armor. "Inside," Daniel said, not loud, not frantic, firm, certain, the kind of command that made chaos fall into line. "Now." Mark nodded, not trusting his voice, and hurried his family toward the sliding doors while Daniel stayed half a step behind, scanning the lot. Rex's head turning in slow arcs, nose tasting the wind. Inside, the clinic was in its end-of-shift quiet. Lights dimmed in waiting areas, a few patients lingering with paperwork, a nurse rolling a cart toward the back. The air smelled of disinfectant and warm plastic, and the hum of fluorescent bulbs felt too loud. Daniel guided them past the reception desk with quick, polite words that sounded routine to anyone listening, but carried an edge to anyone who understood. "We need a room. Secure. Now." Nurse, same pale blue scrubs as earlier, tired eyes but attentive, nodded and led them down a corridor toward exam room 3, the one with the solid door and the small window pane set high, the one tucked away from the main flow. Rachel ushered Lily inside, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers, while Mark hovered at the threshold like he couldn't decide if closing the door would trap them or save them. Daniel stepped in last, crouched to Lily's level for half a second, and let his voice soften just enough to give her something steady. "You're safe in here," he said. "Rex and I are right outside." Lily looked at Rex with wide, wet eyes and nodded, as if she believed the dog more than any adult. Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb already moving, and spoke quietly into it as he backed out. "I need you on a secure line," he said to someone on the other end. "Now. And I need a unit I can trust." Then he shut the door, tested the handle, and turned. Rex moved before Daniel even finished exhaling, body flowing into position in front of the door like a trained wall sliding into place. It was immediate and absolute. Paws planted, shoulders squared, head slightly lowered, eyes fixed down the hallway. The dog's breath came steady, but a low growl vibrated deep in his chest, not a threat thrown outward, but a warning held in reserve. A second nurse approached with a clipboard, steps quick. "Officer, I just need to check." she began, reaching for the handle. Rex's head snapped toward her with laser focus, and the growl deepened, the sound of a storm under ice. The nurse froze mid-step, eyes widening. Daniel lifted a hand. "Stop," he said calmly. "Please. No one goes in until I confirm who you are." The nurse blinked, startled, offended for a heartbeat, then saw Daniel's face, controlled, serious, and nodded, backing away. Down the hall, footsteps approached. Too confident, too fast for staff at this hour, and Rex's posture tightened like a spring. A man in a dark jacket rounded the corner with a badge clipped to his belt, not the clinic's. Something meant to flash authority. "I'm here to transport the child," he said briskly, voice practiced, like he'd said it 100 times. "There's been a call. Family request." Daniel didn't move aside. "Name," he said. "Badge number." The man's eyes flicked, just once, toward the door Rex was blocking. "No time," he replied, and took a step forward as if momentum could become permission. Rex's growl turned into something sharper, and when the man tried to angle around the dog, Rex snapped the air inches from his wrist. No bite, no contact. Just a surgical warning that made the man jerk back with a curse. In that split second, the scent hit Rex fully. Daniel saw it in the dog's sudden intensity, and Rex's gaze locked on the man with unmistakable recognition, the same recognition from the community center. This was connected. This belonged to the enforcer's world. Daniel's phone buzzed in his palm as the trusted contact finally answered, and Daniel spoke one sentence, quiet but lethal. "Now," he said, "we've got an impersonator in the hall." The man in the dark jacket stiffened, his polite mask cracking, and he reached inside his coat, too smooth, too practiced, just as Rex surged a half-step forward, not attacking, but forcing distance, forcing the man's hand to pause. Daniel's free hand moved to his radio, voice steady. "Security to corridor 3. Nurses scattered, eyes wide, the hallway suddenly chaos. Inside the room, Rachel heard the commotion and pulled Lily into her arms so tightly Lily squeaked, Mark pressing his body against the door as if he could reinforce it with sheer will. "What's happening?" Rachel whispered, tears spilling now. Mark couldn't answer. He was staring at the thin strip of light under the door, waiting to see a shadow cross. Outside, Rex held the line with the calm menace of a guardian who didn't need to prove anything. He only needed to prevent one fatal mistake. When footsteps thundered from the far end, actual security, actual uniforms, Daniel's posture didn't relax until the man was pinned. His jacket searched, and a small syringe clattered onto the tile, rolling to a stop near Rex's paw like a confession. Rachel's breath left her in a sob she couldn't control when Daniel opened the door a crack and said, "You were right to come here." Mark's knees nearly buckled with the delayed impact of what could have happened, and Lily's face buried in her mother's shoulder as if her body finally accepted the danger was real. Rachel looked past Daniel to Rex, still planted at the threshold, still watching, still refusing to move until every threat was gone, and the truth shattered whatever strength she'd been holding together. Someone had come to take her child, and the only reason they still had her was the steady, unbreakable wall of that dog. She sank into a chair with Lily in her lap and began to cry. Not quiet tears, but the kind that carried terror, gratitude, relief, and exhaustion all at once. While Mark covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking as if his body had been waiting for permission to fall apart. Rex finally turned his head slightly, meeting Lily's gaze for a heartbeat, then settled back into his stance at the door, silent and steadfast. as if he understood that the safest sound in the world sometimes wasn't a promise from a human, but the quiet certainty of a protector who would not let anyone through. The night didn't end with sirens fading into distance and everyone pretending it was over. It ended with a different kind of sound. The steady churn of engines arriving with purpose. The kind of official presence that didn't ask the town for permission. Just past midnight, as the clinic's hallways settled back into uneasy, quiet, and Rachel sat in exam room 3 rocking Lily like she was trying to rock fear out of her bones. Headlights swept across the parking lot in a tight formation. Unmarked SUVs, state plates, men and women in plain jackets stepping out with clipped movements and eyes that missed nothing. Daniel watched from the corridor with his phone still warm in his hand, Rex at his side, and when the lead investigator approached, a woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back and a badge that flashed state when it caught the light, Daniel felt the first breath of real relief since this began. "Officer Hale?" she asked, voice professional, calm. Daniel nodded once. "That's me." "I'm Special Agent Marin Briggs," she said. And then, without ceremony, "We got your call, and we pulled the emergency flag on your internal channels. You did the right thing." Daniel didn't waste time. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out the evidence bag with the red-taped USB like it was a live wire, and handed it to her with careful fingers. "This is the spine of it," he said. "Audio, documents, emails, names." Briggs's gaze sharpened as she looked at the sealed bag, then at Daniel. "And tonight?" Daniel's eyes flicked down the hallway where the impersonator sat cuffed under guard, face pale, bravado gone. "Attempted abduction," Daniel said flatly. He had a syringe. Rex stopped him at the door. Briggs exhaled slowly, the kind of controlled anger that didn't need volume. "Okay," she said. "Then we're not knocking gently anymore." What followed moved fast, like a chain reaction that had been waiting for a spark. Within an hour, the impersonator was in a vehicle headed out of town, and a forensic tech was photographing the syringe, swabbing the jacket lining, bagging everything with hands that didn't tremble. Briggs's team split into pairs, phones pressed to ears, warrants drafted and approved with a speed that told Daniel the USB had landed in exactly the right hands. By dawn, when the sky turned that cold gray blue that makes everything look honest, the first domino fell in public. The bully enforcer was pulled from a booth at the diner, halfway through his coffee, still smirking at some private joke until 2 agents slid in on either side and laid him out in a calm, unarguable voice. "Stand up. Hands where we can see them." The diner went silent, forks hovering, and the enforcer's smile died as cuffs clicked around his wrists. Outside, his boots scraped the pavement, and for the first time, he looked small. The second domino fell before lunch. Sergeant Pruitt's patrol car was boxed in behind the station, and when he stepped out with that same folksy grin, it faltered under the weight of a warrant and an investigator's steady stare. "Misplaced reports," Briggs said, flipping pages. "Camera outages, witness tampering. You want to tell me you were just unlucky?" Pruitt's face reddened, then drained, and the grin collapsed into something frightened and ugly. He tried to speak, tried to laugh it off. But the agents didn't laugh back. They walked him through the station he'd controlled for years, past officers who suddenly found their shoes fascinating, and the click of the door behind him sounded like a town waking up. The third domino was the one people had been too afraid to imagine could fall. Caraway's office lights were still on when state investigators climbed the side stairwell, and inside the private meeting room, the tablet with riverfront maps sat exactly where he'd left it, as if the future could be plotted and purchased. Caraway met them with polished outrage. "This is absurd," he said, smooth as a campaign ad. "I'm a respected businessman." Briggs didn't raise her voice. She simply set the USB evidence list on the table between them and tapped one line with a finger. "Your voice," she said, "on audio, talking about leverage, talking about getting the child out of the way." The room's air seemed to thin. Caraway's eyes flicked once, searching for an escape in charm, in money, in influence, and found none. Councilman Dyer cracked next, sweat beading, hands shaking, words spilling like water from a broken dam. Because when power turns on you, it always eats the weak first. By the end of the day, the story wasn't a rumor. It was a headline. People gathered outside the station not to wave flags, but to demand answers. Phones recorded. Voices rose. The town's silence, once heavy as a lid, finally lifted. And underneath it was anger, hot, righteous, overdue. In the clinic, Rachel watched the news on a muted TV while Lily napped curled against her, and for the first time in days, Rachel's shoulders unclenched. Mark signed a statement with shaking hands, then sat back and stared at the paper as if it were proof he hadn't imagined any of it. Daniel stood nearby, not soaking in praise, not looking for a medal, just watching the family breathe again. In the weeks that followed, the town began the slow work of repair. New leadership stepped in, outside oversight stayed longer than the locals liked, and people who'd once looked away started showing up, bringing casseroles, offering rides, apologizing in awkward, honest sentences. Mark's complaints about the riverfront project turned into a real investigation, and the playground near the river was closed until testing proved it safe. For once, progress had to answer to truth. Rachel returned to the community center with Lily for a small support meeting, and when they walked through the doors, Lily didn't freeze. She held her mother's hand, yes, but she didn't disappear into herself. Her smile, this time, reached her eyes. Daniel visited them one crisp afternoon after the chaos had settled, Rex trotting beside him with the same steady confidence, and Lily sat on the porch steps, bundled in a coat, swinging her feet. She looked at Rex with a shy seriousness, then patted her knee the way she'd seen adults do. Rex approached slowly, respectful, and gently lowered his head onto her lap with a soft huff, warm breath fogging in the cold air. Lily's small fingers slid into his fur, and she giggled, an honest sound, bright and free. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth as tears returned. But these were different tears, lighter, the kind that come when your body finally believes it survived. Mark stood behind her with an arm around her shoulders, watching the dog like he was looking at a miracle that happened to have 4 paws. Daniel said nothing, because he didn't need to. The lesson had already written itself across the town. Courage isn't loud at first. Sometimes it's a quiet officer refusing to look away. Sometimes it's parents choosing safety over pride. Sometimes it's a dog planting his paws in front of a door and holding the line. And once one brave act happens, it spreads, domino after domino, until even a small town learns that protection matters, truth matters, and the vulnerable are not bargaining chips for powerful men.